Hi, I'm Andy.
I'm Taylor, and we are the Newton Brothers.
I went to see Star Wars with my dad. I came home, and a couple days later, my uncle played the main title for Star Wars on the piano in our house, and that was it. I started taking lessons and got into recitals and got into classical music. Did a stint in my undergrad as a music director for the theater works. We did a lot of musicals. And then out of college, did a short business career, wasn't sure what I was gonna do, and then went to Berklee College of Music. And I was gonna get my master's in composition and film scoring, but after a year, I bounced and moved back to LA. I'll go to you because I think we met shortly after that.
My mom was an opera singer, and she played piano, classical music. My dad played in country bands and rock music, so I grew up going to see shows and watching them play and perform. I was kind of doing formal training with my mom growing up, and then I kind of just, like a lot of young musicians, kind of took it for granted and was just like, I don't want anything to do with this. Like, I don't want to learn, Beethoven. I don't want to learn any of this kind of music. I want to just learn, rock tunes or write my own music. 13, 14, I started playing bands and getting into electronic music. And then that transferred into me begging college kids when I was in high school to score their little short films. It was great. I think I moved to LA in like 2001. And then from there, that's when we met.
I had been running around town trying to get jobs doing anything. I was doing commercials. I was doing lots of student films at USC and LMU. And then through a series of events, ended up working at a place called Tom and Andy. And they were working on Mothman Prophecies and Rules of Attraction. And that was an incredible experience. It was a lot of fun. In that time, Taylor and I met.
Yeah, and I had just finished working for Hans Zimmer. We didn't want to use our names just because some of the work we were doing, we were supposed to be working on these other stuff. So we wanted kind of like a name that didn't have our name. And that's how we came up with the Newton Brothers.
We had day jobs. We were hustling. And that was what's sort of funny, was that we were sort of hiding what we were doing. So we came up with the Newton Brothers. But then we never changed the name. No,
it kind of stuck. Yeah, it just kind of rolled. We had friends that were directors starting out and doing their first feature film. And we build kind of this rapport with them. And then that led to their next film. So we started building up these great team of different directors and producers that we collaborated with. We were kind of not really getting very far for a while, maybe like 4 years, with anything really known or the actors that had a lot of rapport. I would say Detachment was probably like our big break with Adrian Brody. That kind of shifted and changed the way we were perceived or noticed, or I don't know. I felt like we were always writing music that we loved, but it just didn't resonate with the right people, get the right exposure. We went on to do a series with a bunch of different films, different directors and producers, and then we met with Mike Flanagan, and he did a movie called Oculus, and that kind of blew up in the horror genre. For Dr. Sleep, we spent about maybe 3 or 4 months just preparing for the film before we saw any footage or anything. We read The Shining and obviously and Dr. Sleep and the books, and we took really diligent notes of note taking and tabs everything. And then we just kind of decided what certain characters and scenes, what we felt like it meant in a sonic sense, because we knew early on, talking to Mike, what he wanted the score to be more of rather than something else, which is great. We knew that it was going to be kind of this atonal. It was going to be, melody driven. And so right off the bat, I'm thinking, okay, well, how can we make this unique to these characters, unique to this film? The original had a very interesting sonic palette that was very distinct, especially for the time. It was so ahead of its time when that first came out. And it had a lot of classical music too, doing incredible, strange atonal stuff and clusters and all this stuff. And there's these characters in the book and in the movie that are kind of like gypsies that have been around for a very long time, like almost like vampires, but they have a sense of this really old gypsies. And so we tried finding elements and instruments that was a collage of different centuries and different cultures because they're kind of these like nomads that just kind of pick up things as they move through existence, is what it feels like in the book. So one of the instruments we wanted to use, we researched this instrument called the Hurdy Grande. It's this giant hurdy-gurdy, as you would imagine, and has a crank on the end. And this guy, Paul Drescher, he developed this crazy instrument. And so contacted him, and he makes all these amazing instruments. And we went up to San Francisco, and we just started recording a bunch of stuff. And it had the sense of it being like this evil kind of low, dirty sound. But it could also be played slowly, so just kind of this warm drone. And so we use these kind of instruments like that for these guys as its kind of signature sound, along with bass flutes, and we pitched them down. We took really weird percussion and shells and different stuff. And we just kind of wanted to make this warm palette that felt very ethnic, but yet different for these different people. This is the Resonant Garden. It's an incredible, very unique synth. We have it set up right now so it feeds into itself different delays and different effects, and then we route it through another tape delay, the Magneto actually, which is really just such an amazing modular delay. We use that for a lot of the hits and the strikes in Dr. Sleep, and we kind of made sample sets with it. When playing with it, it's a bit of work to get like certain sounds out of it. So we just did these long takes of different hits and different sounds, and we just chopped it all up, and we made sample sets, and then allowed us to just use Contact and quickly access the sounds we made. But it's very creative. You just have to spend some time to get some good stuff out of it. Most of everything that we use for all the modular stuff, because we both love delay, and for a lot of films it works so well, this Magneto is a fantastic tape delay. It just sounds so warm, so thick. I actually use that more than the Space Echo. It's just such a great sound. And then the other aspect is the wind.
Yeah, in Dr. Sleep, Dan, he is troubled by the wind. The sound of wind brings him back to the Overlook and all of the terrible things that happened there. We talked about how wind could play a part in the score without just being the sound of wind, and started exploring instruments that are, wind driven. There's a large palette of instruments that are wind driven. But what's interesting about the physical, like weather wind acting on something, is it's an completely egoless experience. There's no person's ability or lack of ability being employed upon an instrument. It's just nature. We looked at a whole bunch of different wind harps. We found manufacturers kind of all over the world and found interesting ones. And then we came across this wind harp. I went up there one weekend just to scope it out, just to see, will this be plausible? And it's a couple miles from San Francisco Airport. That's an international airport, so you have planes taking off every couple of minutes. There's birds, you're in nature.
Plus, there's this amazing breakfast restaurant there that
there's a great, yeah.
I just thought, why not?
But the sound that comes from this thing is amazing. It has a low end thing happening with high end happening, and they're happening separate from each other because the wind is blowing at different speeds at different heights because it's over 90 feet. So we recorded that, and then we waited for a wind event. We actually talked to some of our friends in town who are meteorologists and asked them to get back to us. Amber and Evelyn, the lovely CBS meteorologists,
who calculated the wind.
Yeah, they got back to us and said there's going to be a wind event in San Francisco around New Year's Eve day. The first day it was too windy, it was out of control, too much noise. And then around on New Year's Eve day, the wind was just right. It was perfect. And the sounds that we ended up using and taking and sampling and turning into sort of instruments, it happened as the sun set on New Year's Eve of 2018, I guess.
Yeah.
And we turned that into a whole sort of library of sounds. I mean, what you can do with sounds now, I'm not the modular guy, but mad scientist here is. So we ran the wind through a lot of the modular stuff. We ran voices, just breathing, singing.
And we took some synths to make them sound like voices. We did some just kind of both ends of the spectrum.
They call it playing music for a reason. Like you should have fun. So we got in here one day for a whole day on Saturday.
Yeah, we did.
You and James and just went nuts and made sounds, and just there was no bad sound. It was just like that's cooler than that. There was no like, oh, that's terrible, don't do that. It was like, well, that's really effed. Like, let's try it again. Like, make it louder.
We made a lot of cool single hits even out of just really weird stuff. It was just really nice to spend that much time on a project, just making all these sounds and having them all chopped up and then working from that. It was it's very creative, you know?
It's really a fun process to get in and because there's the composition part, which is tons of fun, but then the production can be just as fun. I mean, even Jerry Goldsmith would play around with production and with the Echoplex. And I know we played around with a lot of, most of the stuff we played around with treating orchestra ended up failing. It didn't sound authentic. It sounded too like we forced it. But there were a handful of things that we tried.
Yeah.
There are some woodwind, like little triplet figures that we ran through the Space Echo, and those sounded great. Yeah, I could talk about this for days, just how much fun it is to manipulate sounds and
we also, and that was from the sonic side of it, like just from more the sounds and weird organic and inorganic things we caught. Then there was the orchestral element of it, and so, which was great because we had already written all these parts and pieces with all these kind of sound source organic elements, and then we were trying things with the orchestra. We were trying like micro tuning and crazy stuff and seeing how it would blend with what we had. And we did interesting things with recording techniques with the choir. We'd have them face away from the mics or face to the sides of the mics. Mark Graham and Matt Ward decided we recorded the orchestra a little bit differently than the most films do. And so they would kind of feel like you'd have violins here and violins there, and it would feel like it's moving and skipping a little bit.
They would almost talk to each other mid phrase. You could just have a simple chord happening that, like the violins on the right would just sort of peter off, and the ones on the left would pick up from them. And you wouldn't know except that you're sitting there and you feel the balance shift, and it's subtle but nice.
It was subtle, yeah, and it was great to kind of have the orchestra try to mimic some of the synthesizers, and just to kind of play with the give and take on that stuff. And it was great because then once we had that in the mixing stage, we could kind of pull in and pull out the different things we wanted to keep and blend together. Super fun.
In a similar way to sort of all the wacky instruments, we wanted to experiment with how the orchestra could we could use parts of the orchestra to create texture without just, having clangio or making noises. And so we'd kind of been writing some 12 tone rows to find a theme, like to have like a sort of a serial theme. And we have two that are in the film, but then we also explored the idea of polychords. So basically having two chords that make up all 12 notes. So I think what we ended up with was we had a C minor over an E major, and you play that together. Now, the tricky thing was that you can't just play that and it's like, oh, magic sauce. So we had C minor and E major, and then D minor and G flat major, I think. Is that right? Yeah. When you just play those together on the piano, it's like, oh, that sounds interesting and unique and cool. But when you get it in with the orchestra, it's a different thing because you need people to, depending on what note people are playing, everyone needs to play at a certain level so it feels just right. And I think that was a ton of fun to get to dial that in a way where like the chord just sits just right, where you have these like...
It's off, but it's on in certain places, yeah. And also finding the balance too, because if you just have a cluster playing and it's just this cluster and it's just noise and it's craziness, but then you have something that's in tune and something else that's out of tune, it doesn't always necessarily sound good. You have to blend it in a certain way. And sometimes we would be like, oh, this is going to sound like that, and this is going to be like this, and it wouldn't be. And so our orchestrator, we all sat down, Mark Ram, and we just were playing, and and of course we'd be like, Mark be like, oh, they're not going to be able to play that.
Yeah, because it's different from a standard. Yeah, if you have notes on a page, players are going to play those notes, and you can write it very proficiently in a way where it's like, cool, everyone's playing an E flat major chord, and everyone plays their specific notes and their tensions or whatever.
Yeah, interpretations.
And it works well. But with this score, the notes would all be on the page, the dynamics would all be on the page, and the first time we play it through, it'd be like, whoa, that doesn't sound right. Oh, that's not right, because we had to adjust pretty aggressively,
yeah, we did.
But we were really good. Like Mark was really good about being on the stage and like, okay, oboes, you need to like play your G much quieter, and like violins, you need to play your G sharp much louder so that this is conflicting with that. And it was
a little tricky.
A lot of fun, but a very interesting experience for sure. We're going to play some of the sounds that we've been working on for a variety of these films and TV shows. That was some sounds from the wind harp that we recorded. We have hours of audio that we recorded, and going through that audio was tricky to sort of find what was usable and not usable, and then sort of taking that wind harp sound and combining it with other synthesizers, running it through some of the modular gear.
The orchestra.
And then having the orchestra perform with it in some cases, the orchestrator and conductor, and having him sort of guide the orchestra to play along with the ebbs and flows of what was happening. So maybe we'll look at another sound.
Great. The Resonant Garden was our primary tool, I believe we used on that, from Folktech, that we just kind of made these weird hits and stabs that we combine with other booms and interesting things, but they're predominantly used in Dr. Sleep. We end up calling them the demon hits or something like that.
Yeah.
So we took a bunch of samples. We did like a whole couple days of synths and stuff. And one of the main synths, again, I'm a huge fan of the stuff they make, is the mescaline, which kind of makes these vocal-like pads and sounds. And so what you just heard was one of the sounds that we kind of comped some takes from and combined certain delays and reverbs and stuff. Let me play you another one. So a couple of those sounds actually are to pitch, and some of them we have just kind of go in these clusters and these loops that we made for them. And you can just keep adding, more tones and overtones to it. And it's great. It just kind of builds and builds and builds.
What about the waterphone?
So some of the subtle drones that we're making, they're just like super low end drones, but we combine them with a lot of other things like some cellos and basses, and they're just super simple, but very effective for this film. So that's the waterphone. So basically the problem with the waterphone, as everybody knows, is you strike it and it just decays and that's the end of the sound. But it's such a beautiful sound. The problem is that we couldn't really use it for just striking it like one time. So we just stretched it out and made it into these pads, and you get all these weird overtones, but it works really well with strings. It gives this kind of like ghostly, airy quality to it. And we ended up using that actually on Haunting Hill House and Dr. Sleep, which never happens. We use the same sound, but it turned out great. We have a couple more from that set. And this waterphone is a little more, you can hear, sounds to me more like either a woman screaming or a waterphone. Let's see if I can, there it is. It's pitched down quite a bit. So it has like that guttural sound.
Yeah, and it works nicely in The Haunting of Hill House because it sets like a little bit of a texture. If that's happening and then a piano comes in and plays one of the themes real gently while that's happening, it creates like a whole sort of, it creates a whole sound that sort of changes the dynamic, even though it's a very subtle shift, but it does something interesting. I think it sort of takes you on a little bit of a journey because it sets sort of a vibe in the room. It's like walking into the foyer of a house. You walk in and you're like, oh, here we go. And then past the foyer, it opens up into the house. I feel like music sort of does the same thing. You set a palette or a tone and then you get into what's happening. I didn't mean to, there's no pun in that with The Haunting of Hill House.
No.
It just worked out that way.
That's okay. So that's just more crazy wind that has all these overtones. And what's great is it sits so well in Dr. Sleep. It just kind of sits there and it just has these, it almost sounds like chattering people talking.
Yeah, it's weird that the idea of wind, I mean, once you start pitch shifting it and adding sounds to it, it has a texture, sort of, I don't want to say it's like recording on tape, but it takes on like a different sort of structure than it was just by itself musically.
Should we show Hurdy?
Yeah. So that's some of the Hurdy Grande that we recorded for Dr. Sleep. We spent a whole evening with Paul Drescher and recorded with him, and then had another session where we recorded with him as well, and had him do a variety of things. A lot of what we did, we had him do a minor third gliss that we had the orchestra sort of mimic. So we're gonna play one of those cues for you and let you hear sort of the cacophony of noise and variety of textures that are going along with that scene. But that is sort of the basis of, that was sort of the first, I think that was your idea, the Hurdy Grande, like to sort of go after something like that, to go with the true knot because of their nomadic vibe.
Yeah, it needed to be a single sound that basically you heard and you were like, oh, that's those guys. So, because we couldn't be playing some piano motif or any really, we tried putting melody on it, but what seemed to work was simply this sound accompanied with certain percussion and a heartbeat. So we'll play that for you now. Getting into film music was really kind of a natural transition for me because I was in bands, and with all these different, the thing about bands is like you'd rehearse, and someone would leave and move away or something, or it wouldn't keep working out. And so what's great about film music is you could just sit there and just start composing. It was just you, and create the kind of music you want for this project you're working on. And so I think being in love with Herman and Williams and those kind of composers, and watching those films like Vertigo and Psycho and E.T. and Star Wars and all these movies everyone's grown up on, you just kind of have this love for the whole entire cinematic world of what it is, these amazing visuals that you're seeing with this music that kind of, I don't know, for me, it kind of struck a chord.
I think composition was something I was very interested in early, but I don't think I knew it until later. But looking back, I think the obvious tell was, I specifically remember going to see Raiders of the Lost Ark, and that main theme comes on, and I don't remember how old I was, but I was under 10, and just being so moved. Of course, it's like there's the adventure, and like he's off doing, this archaeologist who's a teacher gets to go off and do all these wild adventures. But the music resonates with you in a way that I think at a young age, I didn't recognize, oh, I want to do that, because I didn't come from a family that was full. I had musicians in my family, but no one was, a director or a producer or that wasn't something I knew about. And so what I did know was how I connected with the feeling of what was happening. And I think that's what's so interesting about just music in general. And even when Taylor and I came together, it was through just a love of music. And I think that's what makes composition so interesting, is that you can tell a story in the way that you decide. We just finished working on The Grudge, and it has lovely strings and lovely piano, and it has a lot of violent, disturbing sounds as well.
Peacocks.
that we treated and manipulated. And then the end, we collaborated with a band and wrote like a very heavy song. Within the world of film and TV, I think it's really interesting to explore how you can use all the tools, not just the tools, there's the tools of the orchestra, which are endless. There's the tools of a guitar. I heard an interview where Billy Corgan was talking about the idea of how a guitar sounds based on how loud the amp is. If the amp is up loud while he's on stage, he can do different things that affect how the sound is played. And it's so interesting how composition, I know this is a long answer about composition, but it's very interesting, and it's an endless hole that will probably take me one day.
If we've worked with the director and producer before, it's going to be a very different the way we started or how it's going to be in the beginning, really. Usually we'll spot the film if it's someone new, and first time meeting them, and then we'll see what they're looking for, what they want. We're trying to get a good sense of just what is it they're going for. Sometimes they don't know, and then we'll basically write themes separate from each other, and we won't talk about what the other person's doing. We won't want to be influenced by the other person, and then we'll come together and see what we like, what is working before anyone ever hears it. And it creates a very interesting perspective, because when I feel like you're in a room and you're isolated alone, you may think something is grandiose and fantastic when it's really not. Once we do that, we then come together and we evaluate and pick the right cues and things we like. And then we present it several versions to the director and producer. At that point, we then kind of map out the themes and where we're gonna use certain sounds, how they're gonna interact with certain places. And then I'll start a cue, he'll finish it, or we'll do kind of weave in and out. We have a very detailed sheet of who's doing what and where it's at, and that's kind of the basis of everything. Every director you work with, it's actually a different process based on their personality and their tastes and their likes. And you start to learn and understand what they want to do, and you build that kind of relationship with them. And I think for us, our workflow changes based on that.
Composition evolves to a picture. Things are changing, the scenes are changing, the story's changing sometimes drastically.
Yeah.
And you might have an idea at first, like you sit down with everybody, hey, it's gonna be this, and it's gonna do this and go here, and everybody says, yes, that's awesome. And then you execute it, and it's like, wow, that just doesn't work. That sounds terrible, Every project we do, I'm blown away by how it becomes like this road where you see down the road and you go, oh, we're gonna get to the end of the road, that's where we're going. But you don't. Like the car gets a flat tire, you turn left on another road, like someone throws up in front of your car, like all these things happen, and you end up in another country at the end of the project, not even on a road.
I think the biggest help for us is, besides having really good communication with whomever, whatever filmmaker you're working with, is making really lots of suites, lots of suites of different stuff that you can pull from, whether it's tonal or themes. And in the cases where, like Extinction, where we did that in 3 weeks, there wasn't a lot of time for that. So it's just, you kind of have to go and make the best of what you have. And I feel like, again, every situation presents different solutions, and that's kind of where we are at.
Yeah. Horror is an exciting genre because there are no boundaries. Each project, you kind of owe that to try as much as you can, because I think that horror has evolved over time too. It used to be that things were eerie, and then that, like, at a time violence came in, and then jump scares became a thing. Like there's all these just like genres of music, there's evolving, I think, aspects to the horror genre. And we've had a lot of fun playing with all of the aspects, whether it's melodic, noise-driven, strange sounds, unexpected thing, trying to be unexpected.
But it's always about the story.
Yes.
And which comes down to which makes a great film. And that's also for a horror film. And the thing about it that makes it so unique is that there's a very, very big crowd who love those kind of films, the scary films, this suspenseful thriller kind of stuff. But you get seduced into that, and then there's also the story about a family or a kid or whatever's happening, or some couple or something. And so you start getting into what's basically a drama, and then it's surrounded by all these horrific things. And so I think for us, that's what's so appealing. And we've been so fortunate to work with these filmmakers that really are just telling great stories in this kind of universe that's horror. And so for us, it allows us to be like, okay, we're gonna play this drama music, we're gonna play this scary stuff, and we can work with it where maybe, where it's super emotional versus just being scared to death.
Yeah, and I think that there's a big picture in horror that you have to be very aware of that kind of exhausts you creatively, because you have to be thinking always, you're not going to scare someone by your music. It being loud might, but it's what leads up to it. It's the shot, the story, it's the music or the lack thereof. Yeah, and so we spend a lot of time like doing multiple versions of especially scary scenes, like figuring out what are we gonna hit? Are we gonna hit anything at all? We spent a lot of, there was a film, Gerald's Game, a wonderful novel by Stephen King, and Flanagan did this movie brilliantly. And there's a large area in the middle of the film where you're learning about this woman's life. And we all made the decision to not have any music play until, spoiler alert, the woman gets out of bed. And then when she does, the music is very romantic and beautiful, which is odd because there's a lot of blood and what has happened to her is really violent. But we found it was very effective. I mean, we wrote a ton of music in the middle of the movie to support all the dark, weird things that were happening, but it ended up being really a love suite that takes over the last half or the last third of the film. You can play with lullabies, choirs, noise, anything really.
And I find that maybe except for sci-fi, you really can't do that with, you know what I mean? You really can't go so far out of the box where you're just like, man, I don't know about this. Like, we've gotten to do some super crazy, bizarre things that we've used from bugs and animals. I mean, just in the Grudge, like I said, we took peacocks and we pitch bend them down, and like it sounds like this like weird sound that's just in the background, like like crying or something.
Yeah, and Dr. Sleep, there is a theme that is 12 tone. It's serial music, which I don't know
what film does that get to be in?
Yeah, I mean, it can't. There are films that have a lot of 12 tone stuff, but to be able to do that for something like this was really fun, because that's like something you just do in school, and you're in college and your professor will say, write a row series and let's explore how they all work together. Like, well, okay, that's a lot of fun when you're like 18, but to be an adult and be able to do that, yeah, it's really exciting.
Especially today, in today's films, it's difficult to get away with that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Working with Mike Flanagan, the way he tells stories, when it does become scary and it does become intense, you can't be feeling something before it happens, obviously. It's just not scary. There was certain places on Hill House where if the music was creeping up or coming in, the audience would know this is what's going to happen. So there'd be places where all of a sudden, a door would slam or someone would scream or yell, and that actually would be enough sometimes. And there was just no music at all. We found that music would make it less scary, and there were places where music made you feel where maybe something you shouldn't feel. I think the great thing too about silence is space does something else with music. If you play, it's boring sometimes for the composer maybe, but it's super effective where if you have a series of notes that play very spaced out and very slow, it does something to the feeling that even if the music isn't scary, it's uncomfortable. And so, because you're wanting to know what's coming, and it's this kind of lagging of these notes. And so I think that space and that silence is very effective with using it in that technique. And the other element too, I feel, is that when you haven't heard music for a long time, versus like an action movie where it's just wall-to-wall music, and you start to get a little bit dulled to it. The senses are like, oh, there's music playing. Like you've expected it, it's been playing. When you haven't heard it for so long, all of a sudden it's really impactful. You feel it so much. And I think that's what's great about working with like Mike Flanagan and doing those kind of films, is that he is a master at that, at storytelling like that. And we both share that senses of how when to use music in that effect and when not to. And sometimes we've been wrong too. We're like, oh, music should go here, and it shouldn't. And you just try it and you see how you feel. So I think working with silence and having that perspective and when to use it, when not to, is a really important, at least for a filmmaker in that genre and as a composer, to be aware of. And I think that's something we've been grateful to learn over the years.
There's a good story from Haunting of Hill House. The themes were worked out, and Mike was shooting in Atlanta, so we were sending mock-ups to Mike. He would give us little notes on things to adjust. And at one point, I think he wrote back to us and said, more space, more deliberate. And that was kind of it. So we did a version, one of the themes. I'm not super proud of this, but I poured a double tequila. I put it on my keyboard in my studio, and I would play a note on the piano, and I would take a sip of the tequila and I would put it down, and I would play another note. And I would sip the tequila. I thought that I was doing this as an exercise for myself because as a composer, you want here's my music. You want to hear all the sounds, but that's not serving the picture, and that's what he wanted. So I did this as an exercise. Strangely, without the tequila, it was still too close together. So the version that we ended up sending him was the tequila version of the cue is the one we sent him. Additionally, we sent him a percussion track where we grabbed some big percussion and hit it in different ways and just left space. At first, we thought we were creating our own samples that we were gonna use and put together for the show. We just left the track. It was like a 2.5 minute track that was like, boom. Because you let the natural decay, right? You leave it out and then like, boom, boom, boom. Like, we sent that whole track to Flanagan.
Tequila at Hill House.
And the spaced out piano track and a few other things. And we sent it. I remember I was sitting in the 7-Eleven parking lot and Taylor and I were on the phone like, Mike's gonna fire us. For sure, he's gonna fire us. We have like a percussion track that runs for however long with tons of space, uncomfortable space.
It's uncomfortable, yeah.
But episode 6 in Haunting of Hill House, which is the episode where there were lots of beautifully done long shots. The piece of music that starts coming in after 40 minutes of no music is that piece of music because it's spaced out, and that sort of goes into the whole end of that episode. And
I think that being said, it's also great to work with a filmmaker that allows you enough rope to try to, to hang yourself if it happens. So when we were discussing Hill House before he shot it, he told us about it. We knew some of the details. We didn't know, obviously, specifics. They were sending us scripts, and we just jumped in. We just started writing themes and ideas. He would send us emails and be like, I like this, I like that. And we just kept writing and writing. And I would say we probably wrote, 2 or 3 hours worth of pieces. And then he would, something he would like or get attached to, he would say, this is great. And then he was done filming and he came back to LA, and then we sat in the edit bay, and they had put a lot of our stuff already in there, and he just loved it. For a lot of places, it was just working.
Yeah, and it was interesting because the themes were all established, but each episode required a different sort of hands-on approach, which sometimes became tedious, but in a very good way. It would be just like one of the themes just played on piano, and Mike would have it temped into an episode, and he'd say, this works great, just redo it to picture, which is awesome. But it could just be the smallest nuance that would change how it was performed. So we probably have 25 versions of every theme just on piano, because a lot of the time, there was no tempo for most of Haunting of Hill House. Had no tempo. When it came to orchestra, thankfully Mark Graham and his team were wonderful, because we just had to create a tempo or go off of sort of the feel of what was happening, because sort of the rubato vibe is everywhere. There couldn't be tempo ruins the sort of trepidation, the underlying trepidation that you feel, as well as it sort of spoils the sentiment, I think.
There was another project that Mike had to go on to next, so we had to kind of burn through the episodes quickly, and we didn't actually have as much time as, I would say sometimes it was 3 days turnaround on an episode. Every episode, we'd all end up at the dub stage, and we would overwrite actually for the entire episode, and we just discuss on the dub stage, okay, hey, let's take out this cue, maybe this doesn't work. We'd actually joke about it and be like, I'm gonna say 6 cues and see what gets taken out. And it was really fun.
Mike would go around the room after we'd have playback and ask everyone, how many cues do you think I'm gonna take out? And it became like a joke. Yeah.
And the thing that was interesting though, in the seriousness of it all, is that as effective as music is in a project, it can also hinder it when it's in the wrong places or too much. And you have to know when to pull it out and to let it breathe. And Mike is great with that. And we worked in collaboration with him on that. And then the sound design team we had too, we really got to work with them in very close proximity, which made it nice, because I'm sure there's projects you hear where when sound design and music really meet, it can be a bad mix-up if it's not really in sync. And so luckily enough for us, all the guys were really great with that. And so that process of it was great. And we also recorded some really bizarre stuff, because we really wanted to capture like the chilling sound of just, Hill House. And so we recorded like wind, and recorded a water phone that was doing all this weird stuff.
And then, so the main title for Haunting of Hill House is real interesting. We just tried to, you're in a dark room alone for a long time. You try to make reasons and excuses to do things. And a lot of it is just a starting point. Like the paper is blank. Like, am I going to pick up the yellow crayon or the red crayon first? Like, I don't know. Let's pick up the red crayon because
it's red.
It's red. Yeah. So with the main title, it was sort of thinking about the idea of, Mike talks a lot about stories, and stories have a beginning, a middle, and an end. In that, we sort of crafted like the like we do it 3 times, like as sort of for no reason other than like 3 is a very interesting number for everything. Also, the 7 hits, the triplet hits, indicate the 7 family members, and it's not very like exciting. It's just like dun 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 dun. But then it kind of worked. It was like, oh, this is interesting. This is nice. Like, and it is kind of in a space by itself where like that single triplet hit is all that's happening, which is strangely overly simple and kind of we felt was effective.
Yeah, it's very effective. That's kind of how it was the show. Sometimes the music didn't need to be technically difficult. It just needed to really communicate what it is the story is trying to tell.
There's also the aspect of sanity in the Shirley Jackson novel. Insanity is repeating the same thing over and over again, expecting the same results. So we end the piece between a 7th and the F minor with a 6th, and we just repeat it twice, once with the 7th and once with the 6th, just because it was like, just because it's like, it's not going to resolve, it's not going anywhere, and it's like we're trying something different but expecting. Are we expecting the same result? Not. It was sort of our dialogue of like trying something, but we were really happy with how it turned out, because it's sort of like I remember in college, like cadences were a big thing. Like how are you gonna end your music? Like fading out sucks. Like don't do that. So you learn about all the different ways that all the composers like. That was one of my professors in college. It was big into like fading out is weak. Like just like okay. So ending the cue is a thing. So that's how we ended the cue.
The interesting thing too about that long process, which I don't know if a lot of people know, is that when we were working with Mike on movies, and this is what the interesting thing about television is, that we would play cues like everybody else, and he'd be like, give us notes. We go do the notes, come back, and he'd be like, great. On this, it was different because he couldn't sit and like preview all our cues first. So when he heard them towards the middle and end of Hill House, that was the first time he was hearing a lot of the new stuff. So we're sitting there just being like, oh my God, like, your stomach's cramping because like, is he gonna like this? He's not gonna like this. And then if something he didn't like or we needed to change, laptop come open, one of us goes back to the studio, and we would just be like changing on the fly. We'd only have maybe an hour and a half because there would be another playback later on and they had a mix. And so it was very, very, very tight.
Yeah, the TV turnover can be like a train and it hits you. There's no stopping. You're either gonna jump off the train or you're just gonna hold on for dear life and like get to the station and have a nice Perrier.
Writing for TV versus film, it depends on the showrunner because there are those television showrunners who treat it like a film, like a long feature film. So then you're developing themes, reoccurring elements that you remember and that kind of hopefully impact, and you can hum something or you like something. And then there's television where they just want new music, and it's just like bangs you on the head, and and it's effective in driving maybe this stuff, but it's not necessarily memorable. And I think then with film, it's more, again, it's you're writing these themes, telling these stories. So I think there's a lot of television shows now that are coming out that are a lot like just a long feature film. And so lucky enough, we've been fortunate to work with showrunners like Mike who tell it's like a long movie really. And so I think that juxtaposition is really the main thing, the difference between film and TV. And I think TV is changing a lot in that world because it's, there's all these great shows coming out now, and everybody is treating it more like film, I think.